This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
No breakthrough yet as NATO and Russia hold talks over escalating tensions. Al-Shabaab claims responsibility as a car bomb killed at least 9 people near Somalia's Mogadishu airport. And Morocco seeks foreign health workers to plug shortage amid a surge in COVID-19 cases. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details of those stories in just a moment, but first, Uche Okoronkwo with the day's business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Beatrice. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Bit. The World Bank slashes global growth forecasts and warns about growing inequality. And South Africa announces a $71 million COVID relief fund for players in the taxi sector. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Beatrice.
Uche, thank you. And let's begin in Brussels, where NATO and Russian officials have been meeting in the wake of rising tensions over the Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg told reporters after 4 hours of talks that differences between Russia and NATO will be difficult to bridge. During the meeting, Moscow pressed its demands for security guarantees from the West. Meanwhile, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko says NATO is trying to gain superiority in all areas. He adds that there is no common positive agenda between Russia and NATO. This is the second round of diplomatic talks to diffuse growing tensions over Russia's military buildup near the Ukrainian border.
This was not an easy discussion, but that is exactly why this meeting was so important. We had a very serious and direct exchange on the situation in and around Ukraine and the implications for European security. There are significant differences between NATO allies and Russia on these issues. Our differences will not be easy to bridge, but it is a positive sign that all NATO allies and Russia sat down around the same table and engaged on substantive topics.
Well, let's cross over to Ross Cullen. He's joining us in Brussels for more on that. Ross, what are the latest updates from those talks?
Yes, well, Jens Stoltenberg and Wendy Sherman, who's the US Deputy Secretary of State, both of them spoke here in the headquarters of NATO this afternoon after the conclusion of those talks, which ran for 4 hours, an hour longer than scheduled. Wendy Sherman was speaking about European security and the fact that all nations should be free to choose their own security arrangements. She did say that NATO wouldn't slam the door on its open door policy, but the whole issue of a potential future application for NATO membership by Ukraine has been the real core issue here. Russia saying, we've heard from the Deputy Foreign Minister, he was leading Moscow's delegation, Alexander Grushko. You heard him in the introduction, Beatrice, as well. He's been saying that this whole reason for today's crisis meeting here in NATO was because of NATO's aggression, saying that the borders of NATO cannot move any further eastwards to include Ukraine. That would result in unspecified serious consequences, he said. But NATO, for its part, has said there will also be massive consequences if Russia carries out any further aggressive maneuvers towards Ukraine. NATO has said it keeps up its demands for Russia to remove its forces from Ukraine, to remove its forces from around Ukraine, to increase transparency and to de-escalate. The United States saying that Russia started this crisis, started this security crisis, therefore that has to be the first party to make a move to de-escalate. But hearing from Russia, they have said They have no plans or intention to attack Ukraine, but despite that, we heard from the Secretary General here in NATO this afternoon, Jens Stoltenberg, saying that it remains very dangerous. There is still the risk of an armed conflict in Europe, but the paths of dialogue and diplomacy must be used to try to avoid that. You mentioned the military build-up. That's described as provocative by the United States. The 100,000 soldiers from Russia on the borders with Ukraine, armour, artillery, armoured personnel carriers as well, and this has been the reason for this tension and the reason for all these talks this week. US and Russia speaking on Monday, NATO and Ukraine also speaking on Monday, and then NATO and Russia speaking here today. But no agreement was reached at the end of the discussions here today. They do still have very separate positions. Russia wants what it described as waterproof, bulletproof, legally binding guarantees that NATO would never ever accept Ukraine as a member. But NATO, as I mentioned, thinks that all nations should be free to choose their own security arrangements without undue pressure coming from other states. What they did agree to, though, is for further talks down the road, if they can agree on the terms, on conditions of those talks. NATO saying it would bring proposals, and it would hope that Moscow would bring proposals as well. So potentially chance for more alignment if they can agree on further talks.
All right, Ross Cullen joining us there from Brussels. Thank you. Now, Kazakhstan's new government has been sworn in a week after the former cabinet resigned due to the recent unrest. The new Prime Minister Ali Khan Smilov has vowed to prioritize economic recovery and the improvement of people's livelihoods. Economic losses of about $240 million have been reported. Demonstrators clashed with security forces and torched public buildings in one of the country's most devastating crises in 30 years. Peacekeepers from a regional security alliance were called in last week to maintain order. And with the situation stabilizing, the president says the peacekeeping forces will start to leave on a Thursday. Well, earlier we sat down for an exclusive interview with Kazakhstan's State Secretary Erlan Karin. He discussed the presence of foreign troops in the country. The troops were deployed to the country under the Collective Security Treaty Organization.
The presence of peacekeeping forces enabled us to focus on bringing the situation under control. The president has reiterated that the CSTO peacekeepers were invited to Kazakhstan to address the problem. I want to stress again that the CSTO force was not directly involved in the fight against the terrorists. Their main task was to protect our strategic facilities. The anti-terrorist operation was carried out by Kazakhstan Special Police Forces. We overcame the threat with our own force.
Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi has called on China and Turkey to improve mutual trust as well as support each other in order to jointly advance their bilateral ties. Wang Yi made the remarks while meeting with the Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu in Vuxi in East China's Jiangsu province. During the meeting, the Chinese Foreign Minister spoke highly of the development trend between the two countries. He noted that last year marked the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties. At least 9 people have been killed and many more injured after an Al-Shabaab suicide bomber detonated a car bomb close to the Mogadishu International Airport. Mohammed Kahir has more details from the Somali capital.
According to Somali police officials, at least 9 people were killed and more than 20 were wounded after the bomber driving a car detonated his explosives.
It is unacceptable to go silent on what happened in Ventuno October Road today because at least 15 to 20 people were wounded while 9 lost their lives. Before, they used to target security agencies and government officials, but that is over now, and Somali civilians are the target.
The militant group Al-Shabaab, which claimed the responsibility for the attack, said it had targeted a convoy carrying foreigners. The deputy mayor of Mogadishu, who also survived the attack, said the agencies have launched investigations to establish who was the main target.
The security agencies will investigate the target of the attack and will share the outcome when they finalize the inquiry. We reiterate our call to security agencies to beef up security. In the past months, we thought we were okay due to vigilance. and the enemy cannot intimidate us.
The blast comes just days after Somali leaders agreed to conclude already delayed parliamentary elections by next month. Security experts have warned that the armed group Al-Shabaab will take advantage of these latest political tensions in Somalia to launch attacks against government targets if Somali leaders will not resolve their issues urgently. Hamid Kaye, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
8 soldiers, including a high-ranking commander, have been detained over alleged plans to destabilize Burkina Faso's institutions. According to a statement by the Military Prosecutor's Office, the plot was being planned by a group of soldiers. In a statement, the office says it found out the information on Saturday after a member of the group denounced the plan. An investigation has been launched and the suspected soldiers are being questioned. Burkina Faso's government has come under pressure over failures to stem a 6-year insurgency that has forced 1.4 million people to flee their homes. The UN's special representative to Mali has briefed the Security Council on some of the hurdles that the country is facing. Mali is struggling to cope with several challenges in its transitional process, as well as new ECOWAS sanctions. El Gassim Wane told the UN Security Council that every effort should be made to resolve problems linked to the transitional process. Wane warned that a protracted impasse would make it harder to find a consensual way out. He also briefed the Council on the additional sanctions imposed by ECOWAS. The regional bloc put in place the sweeping measures after Malian leaders announced the delay of elections from next month to December the 25th.
Every effort should be made to resolve as soon as possible the current challenges linked to the transition process. A protracted impasse will make it much harder to find a consensual way out while increasing hardships for the populations and further weakening state capacity. Such scenario will have far-reaching consequences for Mali and the region as a whole.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. Morocco seeks foreign health workers to plug a shortage as COVID-19 cases rise. And South African schools reopen amid coronavirus infection fears.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
The little tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
within
the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The World Health Organization says global COVID-19 cases increased by 55% last week. Data shows infections increased in all regions except Africa, which reported a decrease of 11%. Southeast Asia saw the biggest jump of 418%, followed by the Western Pacific at 122%. The World Health Organization says Omicron is quickly becoming the dominant variant. Nearly 60% of samples taken over the past 30 days were Omicron, while over 40% were Delta. The health agency says Europe reported more than 7 million new Omicron cases in the first week of January. It warns that more than half of the population in Europe are on track to contract Omicron in the next 2 months if infections continue at current rates. Morocco is facing a shortage of health workers as it battles the pandemic. To bridge the gap, the country is considering ways to attract foreign health workers. CGTN's Ashtatal has more.
Moroccan hospitals are facing an acute shortage of 32,000 doctors and 65,000 nurses. 1,200 doctors graduate a year, not enough to plug the shortage. So the government is considering different incentives to attract foreign health workers to the country. The potential measures include tax incentives or state aid. Already, the government has removed legal barriers to investments in an effort to incentivize foreign companies to take part in the country's health system.
Foreigners used to find difficulties when they wanted to come to Morocco, so were investors and practicing doctors, even if they were Moroccans living in the countries of the diaspora. Today, we removed all these difficulties and obstacles within the framework of the Law 3321, according to which all foreigners, whether investors or doctors, will be treated the same way as their Moroccan colleagues.
The government is also allowing doctors with permits to practice in other countries to work in Morocco. The country is currently experiencing a surge in COVID-19 cases driven by the Omicron variant. Astatal, CGTN.
Guinea has launched a vaccination drive aimed at children aged between 12 and 17. The first phase of the campaign began in the Kindia and Conakry regions. The country is currently facing a COVID-19 outbreak, driven largely in part by the Omicron variant. The first phase of the campaign will run until January the 21st. The drive is being launched in schools with health workers inoculating students.
The vaccination is for children aged 12 to 17, and we're using the Pfizer vaccine. You know, with children, this kind of thing is not always easy, but it's going well so far.
South Africa's Department of Basic Education has announced that a rotational timetable will continue to be followed as inland schools reopened across 5 provinces on Wednesday. South Africa used a rotation system where students alternate days at school. This is due to ongoing concerns around the COVID-19 pandemic and potential transmission. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
The reopening of schools here in South Africa comes at a time when the country is still dealing with the Omicron variant. As a result, strict protocols will continue to be maintained. Schools where 1 meter social distancing cannot be practiced will continue to use rotational timetable. Other schools, like Matlapaneng Primary School in Gauteng province, have come up with ways to ensure that COVID-19 regulations are strictly adhered to.
The school has established the COVID-19 committee. The COVID-19 committee comprises of 1 parent and the teacher component and also the admin component and 1 learner. We made sure that we adhere to the COVID regulation. We have our stations, the screening stations. Every morning, as you can see where we are right now, learners are being screened. And in each and every classroom, we have a running water whereby learners are requested to wash their hands on daily basis every morning.
According to Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on schooling over the past 2 years. As a result, many schools had to be closed,
which has very devastating impacts on basic education in the past 2 years. We have spoken extensively about the learning losses that we've incurred as a direct result of COVID-19, the loss of teaching and learning time. As a sector, we've sought out different strategies to keep the sector going, even under very difficult conditions.
Minister Motshekga says in late 2021, the education sector saw a significant decline in the number of schools that had to be closed due to COVID-19. This, she says, can be attributed in part to the successful vaccination program of education personnel from June 2021.
We also believe that also the high vaccination rates that we had in the sector have allowed us some element of stability. And we wish to applaud all our schools for doing all they could to ensure that the protocols are observed. And we expect the same also this year to make sure that we keep tight to the protocols and limit any disruptions that will come because of schools closing and opening because of infections in schools.
For now, schools will not offer vaccinations on site as the health department does not have enough capacity to assist in administering the jabs. Yudisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Ugandan authorities have agreed to allow cargo truck crews with negative COVID-19 test results to transit through the country. Hundreds of trucks have been stuck at the Ugandan-Kenyan border as truck drivers protested new COVID-19 containment measures. Leon Senyange reports.
These are some of the first trucks to arrive into Uganda since the decision was made. A resolution by ministers from 4 East African countries agreed that Uganda would allow truck drivers with negative COVID-19 results from member countries to transit through to their destinations. The settlement followed a 6-day strike by the drivers who protested Uganda's proposed review of the Cargo One drivers tracking system. The system allowed COVID-19 testing done within a duration of 7 instead of 14 days. The protest paralyzed business at the Malaba border post, which is one of the major entry points for trucks bringing in goods from Kenya's port of Mombasa. Uganda is a transit route for imports destined for Rwanda, South Sudan, and even the Democratic Republic of Congo. At the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak, Uganda was offering free coronavirus tests to truck drivers. However, a $30 fee was later introduced to cover government costs. Now, all countries have agreed that free antigen tests will be done. All fully vaccinated drivers should have their negative results valid for 14 days. The situation will be reviewed next week. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Meanwhile, travelers in Uganda will not be required to show proof of vaccination against COVID-19 when using public transportation. Authorities in the country had earlier announced that it would be a requirement, as Leon Senyange tells us.
Documents are often needed for travel. To fly, you need a passport. A few days ago, to travel by public means here, you needed this, a COVID-19 vaccination card. The policy was announced after a presidential directive that allowed public transport to resume carrying at full capacity.
The transport sector, which has been operating at 50%, will be opened fully, but with necessary SOPs, such as wearing of masks, full vaccination by both the crew of PSVs and the travelers.
But the decision has since been reversed. Travelers can now move about without having to show their vaccination cards.
There are very many passengers who are worried because some of them have not been vaccinated. So when they try to talk to them, he said, it is difficult for us, but when they have been vaccinated, they will get free means of transport.
According to Uganda's Ministry of Health, the country's COVID-19 positivity rate has risen from 11% in the third week of December to 23% now. And with just 3% of the population fully vaccinated, many are worried that things might get worse. For some of the travelers, there is no throwing caution to the wind.
Everyone is supposed to abide by the rule that are imposed by the health authorities, and that is to put the face mask, you clean your hands, and you make sure you don't just greet anyhow.
I wear the mask and I have some too. I feel safe. I don't want to have the fear.
The opening up of schools, transport, sports, and soon bars could bring a sense of reprieve after 2 years of restrictions. But the government is continuing to push its vaccination campaign across the country. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
In Nigeria, transport and road safety officials have asked car owners and drivers to properly maintain their vehicles and observe traffic regulations at all times. Their plea follows an increase in the number of road accidents in the West African nation. Insurers in the country have also raised their concerns about the failure of some motorists to get their vehicles properly covered. Our correspondent Tsem Akende reports from Jos in the country's northern region.
Road accidents are on the rise in Nigeria, and the government is sounding the alarm.
We have the human factor, we have the mechanical factor, and we have the environmental factor. And in this case, the human factor accounts for the largest proportion of road traffic crashes. And when we talk of human factors, it includes things like speeding, use of phone while driving, carrying overload, dangerous driving, and lots of impermissible things.
The Federal Road Safety Corps in Nigeria says there were 5,320 road crashes, leading to 2,471 deaths in the first half of 2021 alone. 15,882 people, according to the report, sustained injuries, while 15,398 were rescued from the crashes. Many vehicle owners have had to repair their vehicles after accidents because they are uninsured. Insurance experts are urging drivers to get insurance cover for their cars to alleviate the financial pressure.
The insurance company will come and indemnify you. They will quantify the loss, how much is the value of the vehicle. If it is within economic repair, it will be considered for repair. And if it goes above the economic repair, it will be considered as total loss. And they will consider depreciation and pay me the net offer.
Road safety officials in the country are demanding better driving and proper maintenance of vehicles by drivers and owners as ways to reduce road accidents in the country.
A journey that is supposed to take you 5 hours, if you plan it well, you should be able to, you can make it within, if you wake up early, you can make it plus or minus 7 hours, so that you make sure that you move at a safe speed, and then ensure that you go by the routine checks as recommended by manufacturers of your vehicle. Ensure that you carry out good maintenance of your vehicle. Ensure that you use good tires. Don't patronize second-hand tires or used tires or Tokumbo tires, as we always advise. And make sure that your vehicle is road-worthy.
The officials say they have also embarked on public information campaigns as they try to reduce accidents in the country. But beyond the campaign, officials say they will be cracking down on cars that aren't up to road safety standards to ensure the roads and drivers are safe. Tessim Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
There has been some progress in talks between the military commands of Libya's interim government based in Tripoli and those of the eastern-based Libyan National Army. This follows the latest meeting between the acting commander of the eastern-based Libyan National Army and the chief of staff of the western-based interim government's military forces in Sirte. The commanders have agreed on an initiative presented by the Western military leader to disarm militias and either include them in security forces or provide them with jobs and education opportunities. Here's CGTN's Adil Mahroui with more details.
This week, Mohammed al-Haddad, the Chief of Staff of the Government of National Unity, and Abdelrazek al-Nadouri, the acting commander of the eastern-based Libyan National Army, met for the second time this month. The central city of Sirte saw a rare agreement arrived at between the military foes over the management of militia groups.
This meeting sends an important message to all countries involved in the Libyan crisis, some of which believe that Libya can't plan its own future. The 5+5 military commission is the true progressive track in Libya. Such meetings and the positive outcomes showed that Libyan military leaders will work for the nation's benefit no matter what.
Al-Haddad, the Western military leader, presented an initiative to end the existence of independent militias in Libya. He suggested that those who desire a security post should get trained and included in either the police or the military. The rest of the Libyan militants will be provided with employment or education opportunities.
Including militias from the east and west into the military is the fastest way to get rid of the arms and weapons that are widespread beyond the state's control. Both Mohammed al-Haddad and al-Naduri have good connections with many militia groups. I believe they both know their leaders well and can understand their needs. The two figures can get the trust of such groups.
Eastern-based military leaders have approved the plan to incorporate militias into the military. Critics, however, expressed their doubts that the interim cabinet can implement such a vision.
The interim government is operating with two faces. It is still practicing some policies towards the west and different ones towards the east, which is fueling polarization. The government's prime missions are not being dealt with properly. Instead, it's operating and spending huge finances elsewhere.
I don't think Beiba's government has the power to enforce such an inclusion process. He is not welcomed by all militia groups, and therefore an elected cabinet will definitely have more power and will be more capable to implement the militia's inclusion agreement.
The UN's Libya envoy Stephanie Williams welcomed the meeting between al-Haddad and al-Naduri. She urged Libyans to bridge their divisions and called for the holding of the elections by June 2022 at the latest.
We are in a transitional stage, which both the world and Libyans want to get over with. 2.8 million have registered to vote. That's how many people want the elections right away. That's more than 60% of the population. We must meet their demand.
The military meeting this week also discussed a joint security plan to protect the upcoming elections. The top commanders also discussed a budget for establishing a joint military. However, no time frame for the militia's inclusion into the country's armed forces has been announced yet. Adil Mahroui, CGTN.
Well, let's now go to Uche Okoronkwo for a look at the day's business news. Uche.
Thanks, Beatrice. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. The World Bank slashes global growth forecasts and warns about growing inequality. And South Africa announces a $71 million COVID relief fund for players in the taxi sector.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off with the global economic outlook amid rising COVID-19 cases. Now, the World Bank says that COVID-related flare-ups, as well as diminished policy support and lingering supply chain bottlenecks, will see the global economic recovery cooling more than previously estimated this year. Now, the Washington-based lender expects global GDP to probably increase by 4.1% in 2022. That's less than the 4.3% forecast in June. It also expects by 2023 annual output to remain below the pre-pandemic trend in all regions, with emerging markets and developing economies. The projections follow a strong rebound in global growth as demand soared. That's after COVID-related lockdowns were lifted. The World Bank also estimates that the world economy grew 5.5% in 2021. Well, let's head to South Africa now. The country has announced a $71 million fund to help assist drivers of minibus taxis, cab operators, and e-hailing services whose businesses were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and, of course, ongoing national lockdowns. Now, applications are now open, and according to South Africa's Transport Ministry, at least 227,000 operators are expected to receive an estimated $323 in once-off relief. Now, the relief fund was allocated by Parliament in July 2020, but disagreements with the industry led to a delay in its disbursement. Almost 70% of all South African households use minibus taxis, and according to SA Taxi, the South African minibus taxi industry draws an estimated $323 million annually in revenues. Meanwhile, Tunisia has set the threshold of automatic adjustment of fuel prices at 3% instead of 5% throughout 2022. Authorities there say the measures are aimed at reducing pressure on the energy budget and better control the energy deficit that has continued to grow. From Tunisia, here's Anin Shaushi with the details.
The Director General of Hydrocarbons at Tunisia's Energy Ministry explained that the government has been spending heavily on fuel subsidies and had put in place policies to mitigate the energy deficit. Tunisia's revision of fuel prices will affect the prices of gasoline, unleaded gasoline and diesel, but not those of domestic gas cylinders.
Tunisia subsidizes fuel and energy in general. However, this strategy negatively affects the state public finances. The objective of the automatic fuel price adjustment is to adjust the price in accordance with the international market. When a barrel price goes up by $1, it costs an additional $45 million to the state budget.
Authorities say that the gradual lifting of subsidies on energy products will allow Tunisia to reach real prices by 2026.
The gradual lifting of subsidies on energy products is part of a structural reform program for the energy sector. It is one of the main topics of negotiations with the International Monetary Fund.
The 2022 state budget has provided zero taxation for all electric vehicles, including cars and buses.
Tunisia has made a giant leap by encouraging renewable energy production. The state is eyeing 30% renewable energy target by 2030. Now the authorities are encouraging the import and production of electric vehicles. This decision will have a positive impact on the economy.
The Tunisian Finance Department announced that hybrid vehicles will be subject to a reduced consumption duty of 50%. Motor vehicles carrying more than 10 people, as well as vehicles for the transport of goods, will also be exempted from 30% customs duty. Energy experts assert that investing in renewable energy and using electric cars would promote industrial development in Tunisia. The country's oil and gas production covers less than 40% of its needs, with the difference covered by imports. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Meanwhile, here in Kenya, long-distance transporters have called off their strike. The decision follows this week's East African Community Member States interministerial meeting, which was held to resolve the impasse. The regional ministerial meeting agreed that Uganda will conduct free rapid COVID-19 testing on truck drivers at the border towns of Busia and Malaba for 7 days, as all a part of measures to clear a backlog at cargo trucks at those border posts. Now, the bloc also announced that negative COVID-19 test results from national accredited laboratories in the respective member states will be recognized by all partner states. Additionally, member states will implement an adopted EAC Health Pass in order to enable quick verification of COVID-19 test certificates and one's vaccination status. In Uganda, economic experts are now urging the government to give more incentives to small and medium enterprises so that they can recover from the effects of the pandemic. Besides the stimulus measures introduced by the government, economists also want the government to give tax relief to some businesses that have been hit hard by the pandemic. Here's CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reporting.
A rush hour in downtown Kampala. Signs of an economy getting back on its feet. But economists say more support from the government is needed if businesses are to fully recover from the effects of COVID-19.
Government should continue offering tax relief to businesses that it thinks may need it, especially now. And I'm talking here about SMEs mainly, to ensure that they are able to get back to a position where they can genuinely contribute to the growth of the economy.
The government has just lifted restrictions on all sectors of the economy. Small and medium enterprises are now hoping to equally tap into job opportunities available, including the public sector.
We've seen increasingly that there are new obstacles being erected. If you look at the printing sector, for instance, government has said that all printing work should only go to 2 government-owned entities. This is not good for the printing sector. The same with construction. Most of the government work is now directed towards the UPDF.
The experts are optimistic that if businesses are given more incentives, the economic growth rate could hit 5% up from 3.5% last year.
Take advantage of this. Those of you who are struggling, the small businesses, begin to prepare yourself to go to any of your bank, your commercial bank with whom you have been dealing with, so that you can take this money to help you to revive your business.
The Uganda government recently announced a recovery fund of about $56 million for small businesses to borrow at less than 10% per annum.
For those businesses that have closed, it's important that a special arrangement is put in place for these businesses to recover. Some may definitely go into insolvency, but the best thing is that all these businesses are supported in some way to get back on their feet.
While this is being appreciated by business owners, economists also want the government to support businesses that have collapsed. But that could be for the short term. In the long run, the government believes mass vaccination against COVID-19 will create an enabling environment for businesses to thrive. Apart from government support, economists are also encouraging business owners to take advantage of the digital technologies available to widen their markets so that they can keep their businesses afloat during this period of the pandemic. Hilary Isga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And in Tanzania, President Samia Suluhu Hassan revealed that 1.4 million tourists visited the country in 2021, and that's despite the COVID-19 pandemic that severely hit its tourism sector. Now, the government's expectations are that the tourism sector will continue to flourish in 2022 and beyond. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with more.
Dennis Glebik has dedicated his life to the hospitality industry. Having worked in more than 10 countries and traveling to over 100, he says working in Tanzania may be his best posting yet. Despite the last 2 years being challenging due to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, he says 2021 saw the beginning of tourists flocking back into the country, scrambling to get away from cold winters for sunny beaches and beautiful savannas.
In Tanzania, you can go to the parks. You have the Serengeti, the Selous. You can visit Mount Kilimanjaro. You can go to Zanzibar. You can do the beaches. You can do culture. You can do heritage. You can do agriculture visits. You can go to Arusha. You know, the variety that this country has to offer is incredible.
When COVID-19 was at its peak, most of Tanzania's primary tourist markets went into lockdowns. In order to save the tourism sector, the Tanzanian government increased promotion and marketing in new emerging markets like Russia, Israel, Burundi, Malawi, Poland, Rwanda, Congo, and France. This move saw tourism arrival numbers increase.
Na kuingiza nchini watalii milioni 1.4.
We received into the country 1.4 million tourists, as compared to the 620,867 tourists who visited the country in 2020.
According to the National Bureau of Statistics, Tanzania has one of the world's highest percentages of reserved land as protected areas, about 38%. It has 22 national parks and is home to a large variety of wildlife, including the large animals known as the Big Five. The tourism sector contributes about 17.5% of the country's GDP. To try and keep exposing Tanzania's tourism across the world, President Samia Suluhu Hassan was featured in the Royal Tour documentary. It's a film that portrays key and leading tourist sites. The publicity from the Royal Tour filming and the Tourism Board's marketing efforts saw earnings from the tourism sector improve significantly last year.
So the experience that we have gained, we're going to be using on every future potential threat towards our businesses, towards our industry, to how to deal with it.
The government has pledged to remain vigilant in improving the tourism sector despite the challenges posed by COVID-19. It believes this positive trend will bring some relief to the over 1 million people who depend on this industry to survive. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
And now to some international news. The head of the U.S. Central Bank has pledged to stop soaring inflation as he made his case for a second term on Tuesday. Now, the Federal Reserve Chair is seeking lawmakers' approval for a fresh 4-year term. But as he juggles the highest inflation in decades with the pandemic recovery, securing bipartisan support may be the easy part for Powell. Here's Owen Fairclough with more.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear?
Jerome Powell seeking approval from U.S. senators for a second term running the central bank and addressing the most critical economic issue right now.
We know that high inflation exacts a toll, particularly for those less able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation.
Former President Donald Trump chose Powell to run the Federal Reserve, so current President Joe Biden's decision to nominate him for another 4 years is a bipartisan vote of confidence. But that might be the easy part.
In hindsight, Jerome Powell's first term must look like a breeze, stewarding a US economy in a period of maximum employment and with a stock market that couldn't stop setting records. Now, as well as a pandemic that won't go away, the Fed has to wrestle with a problem it hasn't had to worry about for years: soaring inflation.
When the economy crashed in COVID-19's first wave, the Fed saved it by slashing interest rates to near zero and pumping in hundreds of billions of dollars in stimulus. But having been praised for helping to bring employment back to pre-pandemic lows with these moves, Powell is now under fire for driving up the cost of expenses like gas prices by keeping monetary policy too loose for too long. So he needs to act.
We are strongly committed to achieving our statutory goals of maximum employment and price stability. We will use our tools to support the economy and a strong labor market and to prevent higher inflation from becoming entrenched.
That's a sign for some analysts that the Fed will raise its benchmark lending rate at least 4 times this year, much faster than it previously indicated. Higher rates should cool prices, but they also mean higher consumer borrowing costs. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up on Global Business Africa, we'll be analyzing the global economic outlook after the World Bank slashed its growth forecast for 2022 and 2023 amid concerns of rising inequality in the world. So how will this affect the African continent? Join us as we explore this and much more at the top of the hour. For now, back to you, Beatrice.
Uche, thank you. Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. Côte d'Ivoire aim for a strong Africa Cup of Nations start against Equatorial Guinea in Group E.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
And let's start with some AFCON news, where Mali recorded a 1-0 victory over Tunisia in a controversial Group F game at the Africa Cup of Nations that was ended prematurely by referee Gianni Sikazwe. Ibrahima Kone's spot kick shortly after half-time proved to be the difference for Mali in the Group F game, but Tunisia could have earned a draw only for Wabi Kazri to have his late penalty saved at the other end. Mali held on despite having substitute El Bilal Toure sent off late on. Zambian referee Sikanswe then lost control of the game, initially blowing the final whistle on the 85th minute as he got his timekeeping all wrong. But after playing on, he then blew for full time once more before the clock had ticked over to the 90th minute, sparking fury among the Tunisian technical bench. Elsewhere, Cote d'Ivoire will meet Equatorial Guinea in their Africa Cup of Nations Group E opener at the Japoma Stadium in Douala in about an hour's time. One of the two teams will have a chance to go top of the group with a win tonight following Tuesday's 0-0 draw between Algeria and Sierra Leone. Cote d'Ivoire head coach Patrice Biomel and forward Maxwell Kone touched on their tough build-up to the competition, mainly due to COVID-19 and other European clubs releasing players a few days to the start of the tournament.
The preparation was very difficult because of the cases of COVID-19 and also FIFA allowing clubs to retain players until January 3rd. This deprived us of 8 players. So it has to be said, the preparation has been chaotic. I had planned that we would play 3 friendly matches, but we did not play any. So yeah, it has been difficult preparations, but we don't want to complain much. We have to be ready and take up the challenge.
As players, we just want to represent our team in this great competition. The AFCON has started and we continue to prepare as we should. We know we have the ability to do well, and it's up to us to build on our collective. If we play for each other, we don't have much to fear.
Meanwhile, Nigeria Super Eagles handed record tournament winners Egypt their first loss in the Africa Cup of Nations group stages in 18 years. Kelechi Iheanacho netted the 30th minute winner in the highly anticipated Group D clash of the Cameroon 2021 finals to send Nigerians into a frenzy. CGTN's Deji Badimosi brings us the reactions from Lagos.
Not many Nigerian football fans gave the Super Eagles a chance against the Pharaohs of Egypt in their Group D AFCON opener. And the reason is simple. Most fans were not impressed with the way the team played in their last 2 World Cup qualifiers. Even the Nigerian Football Federation was not impressed, and that is why it sacked former head coach Gernot Rohr. But when the referee blew the whistle to commence the game against Egypt at the Romdi Ajia Stadium in Garoua, it was a completely different Super Eagles that Nigerian fans saw. Of course, the team was not essentially different from that of Rohr, but the mentality and style of play were radically changed and pleasing to watch. The Super Eagles dominated the game for long spells, with Egypt and their star man Mohamed Salah struggling to impose themselves. And it was no surprise when Nigeria took the lead through striker Kelechi Iheanacho.
I saw a tactical team playing the Nigerian pattern. So first and foremost, from the first 15 minutes, I knew we were going to have the day. Already I was skeptical initially about that game, but when I saw them play after 20 minutes, I have a change of mind. And it's just because the coach understood our game. We played just like the days of Westerhoff.
Our boys, they were fantastic. They played really well. Under Gernot Rohr, I don't think we could play very well like that. But I think our new coach, Egun Avon, has brought like a balance to the team, and I am proud to be a Nigerian.
It was fantastic, and I saw it coming. I gave a prediction of 1-0 Nigeria winning, and it came to pass.
Nigeria next take on Sudan on Saturday. Fans of the Super Eagles are pretty optimistic the team will take all 3 points against the Sudanese and booking a place in the next round.
That's a walk in the park. We are beating Sudan now. Sudan is not... If we can beat Egypt, Sudan, okay, we are going to beat Sudan. That's a shot. We are qualifying. That's just it. So we are qualifying from that group.
The Super Eagles will be hoping to improve their head-to-head record with Sudan. Both sides have clashed 4 different times, with the Super Eagles coming on top on 3 different occasions and Sudan winning 1. The Sudanese will no doubt fancy their chances against the Nigerian side and hope they can record their first win in the tournament after the stalemate in their first match against Guinea-Bissau. Deji Badimosi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Further afield, Spanish La Liga leaders Real Madrid will face Barcelona in the first semi-final of the Spanish Super Cup held in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The Spanish Soccer Federation agreed on a 3-year deal worth a reported $145 million with the Saudi Sports Authority in 2019 to expand the competition and play the game in the Middle East. Real Madrid head coach Carlo Ancelotti said he does not feel an extra amount of pressure in anticipation of a match like El Clasico, but he's aware of the expectation that the club and fans have, even though La Liga leaders Real arrived to the Super Cup clash with 17 points difference against Barcelona. Real Madrid and Barcelona will clash on Wednesday, while Atletico Bilbao and Atletico Madrid face each other the following day for the other spot in Sunday's final.
We'll be playing against a strong rival that has had more problems than us during the season. But this is just one game, with two teams competing with the same goal, and that is to reach the final.
It could become a turning point for us if we beat Real Madrid. It is very important for us to win the El Clasico. First of all, it means that we get into the final and give us a chance to win a title. It will also be good for the morrow, and we can start trusting the project that we have.
In tennis, Novak Djokovic